Hello friends, and welcome to Figure Study, where we're taking a look at Studio Series Core Class Ravage. So, Ravage. Where to begin? I do kind of feel like this would have been nice to include with Soundwave. I understand why, because, prices, price points, that kind of thing. But this really does kind of feel like an accessory. I mean, as a core figure, he does have a decent amount of articulation when we get to his non-trash compactor cube mode. And the paint's not bad, the detailing's good, but he just really should have come with Soundwave, but then they probably would have had to sell Soundwave with Ravage as like a leader or something like that. I don't know. I wouldn't have necessarily been opposed to that. And before I start talking in detail about the little, and I do mean little, cube that Ravage is, I want to talk about this thing. This little thing comes with Ravage. It's just this little missile thing that may look familiar to people familiar with Soundwave, in particular like G1 design Soundwaves. You can store it on the cube mode. It's not going to fit in Soundwave's chest like this, but you can store it. But it's intended to go with Soundwave. Specifically, it plugs into his missile launcher shoulder thing, and you can like rotate it, whatever. And that's fine for what it is. I feel like the obvious, intention is to make it look more like his G1 gun, because this missile launcher thing, the bit that hooks onto his back, can fold in and make it more of like a little rifle. And you can have Soundwave hold it. And the thing that bugs me about this is a very G1 looking weapon. And that's great. I like that. I appreciate that. I have two problems with this specifically, how this works. One being the handle is so far back that it looks weird in his hand. It's just kind of like there's this tiny bit of rifle back here, and then there's so much in the front, and it's just a little awkward looking. He can't hold it super well because of the shape of his forearm. Like, he can hold it fine. It's not falling out, but it just looks a little bit weird. I don't know, I feel like it could have been a little bit better if they moved the peg up, but they didn't. But the other thing that bugs me about this is he only comes with the one launcher, which means you are forced to choose between G1 accurate weapon, or G1 accurate-ish weapon, or G1 accurate, G1-ish accurate shoulder launcher. So you can't really have both unless you get two Soundwaves and just take the launcher from one of them, which I had considered doing, but I don't want to spend another $30+ just to get that piece, you know? And because it doesn't sit great in his hand anyway, I feel like, But I do kind of wish that he had actually come with two of these, because then you could have one gun, one shoulder cannon, and it'd be even more G1 referential, and then you'd also have that little bit of symmetry when you turn him into the vehicle, and not this like weird rifle that doesn't quite work. I just want to imagine like this here, and then this also in his hand with this. I feel like that would have been a really fun kind of Soundwavy thing. And unfortunately, because of the pegs and stuff on Soundwave, you can't really plug this in anywhere else except maybe his butt. Yeah, you can plug it onto his butt. I either wish that this didn't come with Ravage, so that it's not a part that I would be disappointed in and possibly lose, or just toss in a box somewhere and forget about, or I wish that Soundwave came with a second one of these so that he could do like the proper G1 thing. But I think I've spent way too much time talking about one little silver G1 referential accessory. So on to the little hate cube. So Ravage's alt mode is just him curled up to fit into Soundwave's chest. Nothing special. It doesn't even look particularly good. I do appreciate how well it compacts though. Like, this is a dense little cube for being a little cube. And if you get things lined up just right, it'll slide into Soundwave's chest without much problem, and you can close the chest without any real problem. But getting it lined up just right is a bit tricky, because there are just certain bits with how the feet and legs line up along the bottom that occasionally can lead to things not quite working right, like the door won't necessarily want to close properly. You can kind of mess with it and jiggle things around a little bit, and you get it to fit, and it's okay, but it does kind of suck that, Ravage is supposed to do one thing, and he doesn't necessarily do it that great. And like sometimes putting this in will actually push out the back plate. It could have been done better. I can't really say too much else about this particular mode. There's just nothing there. It's a cube, you know? I like that you can store his accessories on it, which is cool. I like that you can just have everything you basically need for Ravage in the cube, toss it in Soundwave's chest, and everything's good. But yeah, there's really not much else to talk about with this because it's just a block of robot Jaguar parts. It doesn't look particularly attractive. So yeah, in case you're curious, it's, I guess, technically bigger than some of his other cassette forms, just by virtue of the fact that it's not a flat rectangle, it's actually more of a box. So it's not necessarily as wide, but it is thicker. Probably like 2 or 3 times thicker because of the fact that, you know, he doesn't turn into a flat shape, he turns just into a box. The transformation out of his box mode is way easier than going in, because going in you have to figure out how to line up the legs, and there's very particular orientations to do things, whereas going into his Jaguar mode, you just unfurl everything. I do appreciate how there are actually like solid tabbing points for the limbs. So despite the fact that he is tiny and doesn't really do much in terms of transformation, it still locks together pretty solidly when he is in his cube form. And what we're left with is a pretty, honestly good-looking Bumblebee movie Ravage. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, but looks pretty good for what it is, for the size, for the price. There's some okay articulation on it. The paintwork is actually really nice too. Like, you can see in the close-up that there are a lot of little molded details all over. Lots of little like hydraulic piston-looking things and wirings in the legs. That kind of plated spine. The missile launcher that was kind of tucked in on his underside is now on his back. Which, yes, there is a little bit of parts forming with the transformation because you've got to move that rocket launcher and the little hip launchers, but I think that's okay. To get him to fit into a very specific shape that needs to go into another character's chest, I'm willing to forgive. Not forgive, because that sounds pretentious. I'm willing to accept. We'll go with that. I'm willing to accept a certain amount of parts forming with just minor accessories. I think that's fine. It looks good. I think he looks good next to Soundwave. They kind of complement each other nicely, as you'd expect for a Ravage and a Soundwave. It's not a spectacular figure. Again, it's just kind of like you're spending, what, 10 to 12 bucks on a glorified accessory, which kind of sucks, but for what it is, I think it's fine, and I do think he looks really good with Soundwave, like I said. Now, there is a little bit of articulation with Ravage. The head can move up and down. It can't turn side to side or rotate, though. That's a little disappointing. I'm not sure how they could have worked that in for a core class figure. I guess they could have done like a swivel to at least rotate it left and right rather than have it turn, but I don't know. But the mouth does open and close. The shoulder-ish sections are on ball joints, but they are very restricted because of the construction on the figure, so you're not really going to get a lot of in and out or butterfly motion. It's mostly just for spinning around 360. The forelegs have what count as elbows that can bend pretty much 90 in either direction, and the front paws can move up and down quite a bit. It's a pretty decent range, but they're just basic like up and down swivels. The rear legs, same deal. You've got the restricted ball joints, and then the knee, if you want to call it that, can move about 90 degrees in either direction. There's the secondary hinge below that can't quite move 90 degrees in both directions, but can bend a fair bit. And then also the back paws can bend, I want to say, almost 180 degrees total. Like if you're going from front all the way back, it's about 180 degrees. And then its tail can wiggle up and down. If you wanted to, you could disconnect the back hips and de-transform part of the lower body to give him a little bit more of a hunch, but that's not really an intended articulation point. All that said, you can get a little expressive with him. Like, you can have him ready to pounce, you can have him kind of trotting. You can't get super dynamic, but you can do a little bit. It's better than the War for Cybertron version. Size-wise, he is small. Like, he is a core class figure, so of course he's much smaller than a deluxe, but compared to other Ravages, he actually is roughly the right size. Like, well, not right size, but he's roughly comparable in size to other Ravages. He's actually not really any smaller than Masterpiece Ravage. I guess it depends on the criteria you use, but he's roughly the same size. His neck isn't as long, but his tail is longer. His torso, I think the proportions actually are much better on Studio Series Ravage than the Masterpiece. So the Masterpiece has a really long neck. But yeah, he's kind of comparable to other Ravages in terms of size, so I think it kind of works in that regard. But when you put him next to Soundwave, he's... I don't know. We didn't really get to see Ravage next to Soundwave in the movie, really. He just kind of popped out of his chest and bolted at Optimus Prime. I feel like, I think it was Long's Toys that said that Ravage does seem a bit small next to Soundwave, and I am inclined to agree, because Ravage, from what I remember from like the G1 cartoon and stuff, while being a cat-like robot, had more of like a average dog size, you know? Ravage is, you know, I'd say about the size of like a Collie or a German Shepherd or something like that. I know he wasn't a Collie or a German Shepherd, I'm just saying size-wise, he's about that big compared to Soundwave, whereas here, it's more like a house cat. Granted, if I could just push a button and have a house cat appear, that would be awesome, but it does seem like the scale's a little off here. It doesn't ruin it for me or anything like that, but it's a little bit disappointing. But then again, you know, what else could they have done? I don't think they could have come up with something for like a core class figure that could fit into a Voyager class figure's chest and somehow expand into something that's significantly bigger than what we got. I just don't think they could make that work. At least not at the core class price point. And yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about core class Ravage. He's not bad. I'm glad to have him because I feel like he complements Soundwave really well, but as I already said, it is kind of like we're spending 10 to 12 bucks to buy an accessory. You know, I'm not like, oh, Hasbro's the worst or anything like that. You know, they gotta make money, and they probably figured selling a $30 Soundwave would be easier than trying to sell a $50 Soundwave with Ravage, but it does kind of stink. Still, I have him. It's fine. He's on the Soundwave shelf with all the other Ravages, and I think, all things considered, everybody looks good together. As our Ravage, which is just pretty much always a glorified accessory, he's not bad. He is way better than the War for Cybertron version of Ravage, because he actually has a tail and much better proportions overall. Then again, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm complaining about buying Studio Series Ravage as an accessory when we already had to do that with Siege Ravage. What was it? The Voyager Siege Soundwave. I don't think he came with any tapes, so you had to buy Laserbeak and Ravage separately. And admittedly, though, I have the Netflix version of Soundwave, so he came with Laserbeak and Ravage, so I didn't have to buy them separately, but you know, I also had to pay a little bit more because he came with Laserbeak and Ravage. So it's always a toss-up with Soundwave, really. And it happens with third-party figures, too, where you can either get the figure and pay a little bit less, or get them with all the little cassettes and it costs more, or in some cases, they only sell the Soundwave with like one cassette and you've got to buy all the other cassettes separately, and that costs even more money. So yeah, I don't know, I guess maybe it's unfair of me to complain about having to buy this Ravage as an accessory for this Soundwave when we basically had to do that with Soundwave and a lot of his companion bots for a really long time. So now that I've talked myself into a circle and kind of wasted everybody's time, I'm just gonna call it. I think I've said more than enough on Ravage because, like I said, there's not a whole lot to say. He's there. I'm glad I got him. But that is enough about what I think. What do you think of Studio Series Core Class Ravage? Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. If you like this video or any of the other videos that I've done and feel like supporting the channel outside of watching the video in the first place, I do have a Patreon. It's a single $1 tier, gets you early access to new videos, some access to the occasional behind-the-scenes posts that I do, or if I do like work-in-progress stuff or customs I'm working on. And eventually I hope to do polls so anyone who's a patron will be able to chime in on things that I'm considering for like future channel stuff. With all that out of the way, thank you everybody for watching, and remember, art is more than meets the eye.